Okay, I think we are on. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, where you are probably. Welcome to today's program. So glad to have you all here. Our topic is Bridging the Gap, a candid conversation between Africans, African Americans, and Caribbeans. So we just feel that this topic is an important one because we are a group of people, but sometimes it looks like there are some misunderstandings, misconceptions, things that happen that don't allow us to be united as we should be. Mm-hmm. Now, it is a candid conversation. Candid means we're going to be truthful and we're going to be frank. Now, we all know that truth is bitter. There's an African adage that says if two brothers go into a room and they come out laughing, they have deceived themselves. They have lied to each other. They have not told the truth. Because if they told the truth, they probably won't be laughing. And so, not to hurt anybody or make anyone angry, but you might actually get angry after this program, but I'm hoping that that will actually not be the case. We're all hoping that we will understand what we didn't know before. We will be motivated to go and learn more about things that we didn't know, and we will take action. That will be our hope. So we're hoping that this will be a learning opportunity for us to educate ourselves, to understand ourselves, with the goal of being united and making progress because of that. So we have 5 people on the panel today, in addition to myself. And I'm just going to let them quickly introduce themselves to you guys, starting with, and whatever else you want the audience to know, maybe especially as it relates to what we are discussing. So Tewa, would you go first, please?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tewa, and I'm currently living in Boston. So if you hear the wind, it's very windy and there's snow outside. And I'm in my last year of dermatology residency at the Harvard Dermatology Program. And as it relates to this, I'm Nigerian American. I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. And my parents are Nigerian immigrants. So I'm first generation in this country. And I kind of grew up really spending most of my time during the week around almost all African Americans based on the schools that I went to in high school. And then I went to Howard University, a historically Black college in DC. But of course, on the weekends and at home, my family is all Nigerian. So really getting to live this life where I was straddling 2 worlds and 2 cultures. And I remember my dad would always tell me growing up, you are 200% human. You are 100% American and 100% Nigerian, and you have the opportunity to pick the best of both. And so that's really how I've lived my life, and I'm excited to get into the conversations based on my experiences.
Thank you, Tewa. Okay, Mr. Dennis, would you please go next? Are you muted? Mr. Dennis, we're not hearing
Yes,
you.
I'm mute. I was muted. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay.
Anyway, I'm Dennis Greenidge. I was born in beautiful island of Barbados in the Caribbean. I am 9 years into retirement as a software developer, and I'm living in the beautiful country of Belize. And my wife and I, we've moved here now just under a year, and I'm enjoying it. Looking forward to be part of the program and to be part of this discussion and to see what comes out of it. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Abby.
I'm Abby Adeboye. I am an author and a youth speaker. I migrated to the United States in 1990, and I'm loving it so far. I have met people from all over the world, literally. I used to be a part of international teams and programs like that. And I am excited to talk about Blackness and Africanness.
Thank you. Lawrence?
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Lewis. Since we're given where we were born, I was born in Germany, Nuremberg, Germany in 1966 to a German mother and a father who was in the military. I grew up 67, basically. We came here after I was one year old. I grew up in northern Jersey, and I predominantly stayed in the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area until I became an attorney. And then after my first job in the DA's office in Philadelphia, I came down here to Georgia. I am the father of two Black males, 20 years old, who's currently a sophomore in college, and 17, who is a junior in high school. And I work as a criminal defense attorney. That's how I met Januke when she was in the prosecutor's office. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Lorraine.
All right. So I'm Lorraine Olabi, and I'm born and raised American and raised on the south side of Chicago, moved to Georgia about 18 years ago. And I am happily married to my Nigerian husband, Edekunle Owolabi. And so together we're raising two Nigerian American males, which has been interesting. But I am really, really grateful to be a part of this discussion. I'm a retired and grandmother of one. And so I'm really excited about being a part of this conversation and trying to unveil some of the misconceptions and bring some light to all of us, to bring us together. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I guess I should introduce myself too. I'm Tinuke Fawole. I'm also an attorney, but I'm less in the courtrooms nowadays. I really don't want to be there anymore, as much as I loved it. Right now, I feel like I need to be doing something more to impact more people. So over the last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of things on Facebook, especially with immigrant families for the challenges that we have. But I've also been drawn towards this issue of Africans and African Americans because I see the differences, I see the opportunities, but I see also the challenges that keep us apart sometimes. So I've been working on that, and I'm happy to be here today to facilitate this program. So without further ado, let's go on to our first question. So we've put together a few questions that we're hoping will capture a lot of what we want to talk about. However, we're inviting you, our audience, to please put in your questions and your comments. And once we finish the ones that we have put together, we will certainly go into those. So our number one question is, what does Blackness mean to you? Because apparently that means different things to different people. So we're going to start with Dennis. What does Blackness mean to you? Very briefly, please. Thank you.
Blackness, or just Black, is not really a term I view as necessarily positive. It conveys the perception of a lower social ranking or quality. And especially this, I would say this, having spent some time in Europe and most of my adult life in the United States. And just based on those experiences, I don't view the term Blackness in general positive terms. Growing up, it was perhaps maybe around age 9 or 10 that I recall the term, and it was generally used kind of disparagingly,
okay,
rather than one of endearment.
Okay.
So I like everyone else, I use the term Black because it is used in conversation and because it becomes an acceptable method of defining people or groups and or racial classes. But I've never really embraced the term. In recent years, if I may opt for a particular term that I find most useful to me, is I've listened to this, really is from Dr. Can't think of her name all the way. She's from Zimbabwe. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but she used the term African born in fill in the place you were born. So I am more ease with that term in it is in alignment with who I am.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dennis. Dennis is Caribbean, by the way. Okay, Abby, what's your take on this question?
For me, Blackness is Africa. It is Africa, it's diaspora all over the world, and African diaspora is all over the world. When I see people who look like me, who could be, oh, my grandmother several times removed, and I see the similarities and whether it's in the way we do things or it's in the way we look. Sometimes it's not just the look, but in the way we do things. I see Blackness. And so I equate Blackness with Africa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby. Lawrence.
Well, it's interesting because the question is, what does Blackness mean to me? So when I'm in the company of other people, and I'm very sort of alert with how they use the term Blackness. But when you say Black to me or Blackness to me, it just means underdog. It doesn't really have a meaning in the context of, say, a party. If I'm inviting you to a party and you say to me, well, who's going to be there? I would never dream of saying, oh, well, this Black person or that Black. I would never give you a race, a color of the people that are going to be there. Or if you invite me to your church, I say, well, tell me about the pastor. Well, he's Black. That would be odd to me. I would expect you to tell me about his education, his ability to preach. So for me, Black only takes on a context in a competitive economic environment. And in that regard, that when you say to me, Black is about me competing in the marketplace. It's about education. It's about working. And so when you say Black, I just think underdog. That means that I'm gonna have to work. Somebody might, now if you perceive me as being the same, great. But I know when I go into court or I go in to sit down to borrow money for to purchase real estate, I know that there are going to be some folks that sit across the table who may be Black, they may be white, they might be Hispanic, but when they look at me, they may not see all of the talent that I think that I have. They may see less than what is sitting before them. And so for me, I go into the meeting, well, do you have this? I do. And do you have that? I do. And do you have this? I do. And do you have that? I most certainly do. And how about this? It's right here. So I'm not expecting them to view me as the same as everyone else. So I'm coming prepared for whatever you think that I don't have, because I have that, and this thing is gonna go, I'm gonna make this thing go smooth.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We do have 1 minute. Tewa, do you have anything that you want to add to that question?
Yeah, I think when I hear the term Blackness, when I think about Black, for me, it is really Africans displaced, or Africans in Africa, or Africans wherever you find them. It's the diaspora of people who tend to look more similar, tend to have cultures that relate, but might not. Because a Black person that happens to be, for example, born and raised in Germany might not have the same culture, or might be mixed with someone else that might look different, but still people who can trace their roots and heritage back to Africa, to me, that diaspora means Black. And it's interesting because I don't quite think of it as underdog, although yes, in this culture, that is the truth. That's 100% the truth. But when I hear it, I kind of think about like emerging greatness, because I think that we're kind of on a journey towards kind of regaining some of the things that I think in ancient times seem to be maybe synonymous with Black or synonymous with African, that I think we're hopefully getting back to. But yeah, I just think of it as Africans in Africa or outside of Africa.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much for all the diversity that you've brought even into this answer. Very, very enlightening. Okay. Question number 2. What are some of the perceptions you've heard about African and Caribbeans? We're going to do those together. They tend to be on the same page of this type of discussion. So I'm going to ask Lorraine and Lawrence, who are the African Americans on this forum, starting with Lorraine. What are some of the perceptions that you have heard about Africans and Caribbeans as a people?
Okay, all right, thank you. And I think that perceptions, just the question is so important, because we're all a combination of our different life experiences and how we view each other. And I know that I have to confess, being raised on the South Side of Chicago, you know, my view of other cultures is so very limited, my worldview. I went to, you know, all Black schools, Black churches. And so probably like a lot of people, my view of other cultures came from the media, you know, and we could all admit that people of color are not portrayed in a very good light at all. You know, growing up, the portrayals that I remember most are, you know, of poverty, of always the neediness, male dominance, polygamy. All of those things contributed to how I looked at Africans. And it wasn't really until I went away to college and was able to mix with people in school and professionally that I got a different view. But even in that, you know, it was almost like I lumped everybody together. Africans and Caribbean, they were just people that were foreigners and talked differently, had an accent, right? And thinking back, you know, I developed this attitude that because they were here and they were here willingly, that they, you know, I can't say that I had any personal experiences of them putting me down, but I just felt like they were superior because they came from countries where the leadership looked like them, you know, and so the perception was that they thought that we were less than because we were descendants of slaves. And, you know, even at times that, you know, that their perception was much like the white majority, that we were someone to be feared, you know, that we were lazy or second class. I did have those feelings on occasion. So again, it was a perception because I hadn't really developed relationships up to that point.
Thank you so much, Lauren. One very important thing that I got from what you said was perception. Everything you came about with was perception. And that's how a lot of us live our lives, just on perception, not reality, not fact. All right, Lawrence.
I guess I key on the word that Lorraine just used, which is sort of sheltered. I was raised in the Newark, Essex County, Union County area. It's Metro New York. We had some access to New York City, but I don't think I met anybody of African or Caribbean descent before I ever went off to college in New York City. So I have to sort of mirror the statement that I was sheltered. I mean, I went to mixed schools, 7th and 8th grade. I went to private all boys school. I don't recall anybody being from Caribbean or African descent. Now, that being said, a bunch of African Americans ran around in the 70s in dashikis. Yes, I do recall that. Everybody, I got to wear dashiki. So they were trying to connect back to Africa, but I hadn't met any Africans. In terms of television, I didn't have any time to worry about Africans and Caribbeans because there wasn't any Black males on TV. Up to 1972, there was what? There was Sidney Poitier, there was Billy D. Williams, there was Bill Cosby, and maybe Flip Wilson. I mean, I didn't have enough time to think about anybody else because I didn't even see me on the TV. I mean, it was just very limited. Red Fox, I think, was 77 or 78. So I really didn't have any negative perceptions of Africa or Caribbean or anything like that. And then this sort of conversation was interesting because it got me thinking. Almost all of my friends prior to graduating high school were African-American, Blacks, African-Americans. Then when I went off to college, I started thinking about it. Almost all of my friends from the time I entered college are Caribbean. Like Toa says she's Nigerian. In my mind, she's African-American because she was born here, she was raised here. She doesn't have any accent. She identifies as Nigerian. So she's the type of friend, and I just started thinking about this, like everybody traces their heritage back. I got friends from Guyana, Grenada, Haiti, Bahamas. I'm talking about good friends. You know, went to New York because I wanted to go to the clubs and go dancing. And the guy I met that plays music, he's from Guyana. And then another friend is from Grenada. Another friend is Bahamian. So all of the good friends that I married a woman that was from Jamaica. So all of the good friends that I met when I was in New York were from the Caribbean. I mean, I literally, I have a hard time thinking of one African-American friend from the time I entered college. They were almost all from the Caribbean. And I just started, just this conversation has prompted that, like, name all the African-Americans that you met and befriended and are still friends with from college. I don't have one. I mean, I have a friend from college that I knew from high school, but everybody else that I met was from the Caribbean, or their parents were from Africa. They were raised here. Their parents were from Africa, but I don't think I have any African-American friends that I met and stayed friends with from college. So it's sort of super interesting now that I sort of sit down and think about it.
Thank you, Lawrence. And that's so interesting that your perception or your experience and Lorraine's are so different. So she only had the perception, never really could judge for herself until probably she met her husband. Whereas you had the opposite thing. You had a lot of Caribbean friends, and so you knew them exactly. Right. So there wasn't any reason to have a perception because you saw the real deal.
Right.
An interesting thing that happened when we took our children back to Nigeria for the first time. They were 4 and 5 years old, my older ones, and then my son was 11 and a half months. So we went to Nigeria, and of course they loved it so much. So we came back and we started watching Sesame Street again. And one day they saw a depiction of Africa that was bad, and they both started screaming, "No, that's not Africa. Africa is not like that. You know, they have this in Africa, they have that in Africa." So that was so interesting, and I was so happy that they got to see the real Africa first, and so young, so that they could know what the deal was. Thank you so much. Okay, how about African Americans? We haven't gone to that. What are some of the perceptions that you've heard about African Americans? So we'll ask the African and the Caribbean in our midst. So Abby.
I'll tell a story. The kids were about 8 or 9 or something like that, in that age group, and Girl Scouts. So Japan's Girl Scout troop leader was a white lady. Oh, we do this, everything was organized to start the year. Pianos was an African-American lady. The first thing she said was, "I know we all come with excuses of why we can't do this or why we can't do that, but I can't do this work alone. And so everyone needs to pony up." Immediately, I thought to myself, there comes drama. I'm not even going to do this. I'm not going to engage. She was right in tackling it head on. The approach might have been just off-putting, but let me tell you, I got in there, did the work, knowing that nobody else would do the work if I didn't do the work. And several of the parents probably engaged at that point to say, hey, if we want our kids to have a good time, we better start. I was cooking mom, doing this run, that run, and I would not have engaged to that extent if she hadn't called us out. Secondly, we're friends still today. In fact, when she saw this, she was like, when is it taking place? I said, I'll share it on my page. We visited each other. So oftentimes the rumors and the noise on the marketplace crowds out face-to-face and one-to-one interaction. Our noise, Africans, about African Americans is not good. Yet we intermarry, we do business together, we do nonprofits together. That rhetoric needs to change.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Abby. Mr. Dennis, you have 30 seconds to give us your take.
Actually, African Americans and my perception was, as a youngster, I saw everyone as just Americans. I was fascinated with like people like Bill Russell and Oscar Robertson and those basketball players, because that's what I saw on TV. And that was my understanding of Americans. They were talented, they were rich, and they lived in paradise. That was it for me. So I never really had any understanding of race and all the other isms that we've grown accustomed to seeing and hearing now. African Americans were just rich, talented people who lived in paradise.
Wow. Lorraine, how do you feel about that? Lord, that's awesome.
That is amazing. Yes. Yes.
Innocence is great. Okay. Thank you. Okay, question number 3. I think we've touched on this, so we might be able to just speak briefly. Where did you receive your education on the issues we just talked about, on the perceptions? Was it on TV, books, experience, parents, other ways? Tewa, I'm going to ask you to do that first.
Yeah, I think, like I touched on earlier, I got my education in quotes in very different ways. You know, I had kind of a dual education at home. You know, I felt my education about Nigerian culture was just from experiencing it, seeing it day by day. You know, unfortunately, I don't speak fluent Yoruba, but hearing it all the time, you know, my family's native language, and being around my extended family, going to Nigerian weddings and parties. And so my experience about thinking about Africans was really just that, just seeing how life was day to day. And my experience learning about African Americans was also experience, because my school, from elementary school, I was surrounded by African Americans, and then going to college, you know. I think it was interesting because in my Nigerian culture, there would be people that would make comments like, oh, you know, African Americans, usually they have a cousin that's in jail, or they might say little things like that, like, oh, you might want to date someone who is, you know, Nigerian or something, so that you avoid getting caught up in some of that kind of stuff, right? Or, you know, or drama, or people that for some reason don't work hard. But then when I was around African Americans, I would hear things about, you know, kids would make fun of me, and if I come into a class, they might throw a dart at the wall and say, is that how your dad goes fishing for food? You know, or how did you get to school today? Did you get on a vine? You know, those are the kinds of like jokes that kids made about me, you know. Or, you know, I think that they would mention like, oh, you know, your parents really made it out of the jungle. That's really great. You know, sometimes as a joke, and sometimes really just being like, wow, like you guys really made it out, you know? So I think that I got interesting stereotypes and perspectives on both ends, and often felt very isolated and just felt, you know, very like, okay, well, where do I fit in? And, you know, we had an experience as kids called Nana Camp. It was Nigerian Adventists in North America camp. Well, I was really surrounded by a lot of other kids who were like me, who were first generation Americans of Nigerian ancestry. And so that was the only place that I felt normal. That was the only place that I felt like people understood anything about what it was like to be me, because I felt like I was African American, and I also felt like I was Nigerian, and no one let me just be one or the other if I went to the other community, you know? So that was really my education on the two different cultures.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we can go on to the next question. So we all had these perceptions, you know, either true or false. And now you're probably on this panel, or you agreed to be here because that opinion has changed. Maybe you have formed a real opinion. How did that happen? What brought about the change in opinion? How did you get to understand the real thing? Tewa, you're going to start off on that also.
Yeah, I think two formative experiences I'll touch on briefly. One, after my sophomore year of high school, I went to a program called Telluride Association Sophomore Seminars, but it was a summer program for 6 weeks at the University of Michigan. And it was a course on African and African diaspora studies that I took at University of Michigan in high school. And that was super transformative for me. 6 weeks, almost all of the students in this course were African American. There were a few, two of the people there were Jamaican, and then there was one white girl who also took the course. But almost all of the people who were teaching the course had gone to historically Black colleges and universities. So it was amazing to be there. We read all kinds of books. We read books written by Haitian authors, by Senegalese authors. We learned about colonialism and slavery and the things that were deliberately put in place to make Africans and African Americans dislike each other, the miseducations. I mean, we literally in the course talked about why African Americans think the way they do about Africans and why Africans think the way they do about African Americans, and how the division was causing problems in society. So I really was looking at that from an academic perspective, surrounded by these people who went to this magical land of Black college. And so I was like, I have to go to Howard, I have to go to a Black college. And I only applied to one college because of that experience. And then my second formative experience is I have a friend in medical school. She's African American, very intelligent, amazing. And we got into one fight one day because, we were talking about how in medicine, about 75 to 80% of Black people, if you go to almost any medical conference, they'll be Nigerians, not even Africans, right? Like majority Nigerian, even though there's so many African Americans that have also fought to get into this space. And so she talked about how she felt frustrated that Nigerians or Africans might, kind of like what Ms. Lorraine was saying earlier, seem like they're acting superior to African Americans. And she mentioned to me that you all are here, you chose to come to America because of the work that African Americans did to make this a livable space for people that look like us. And so that conversation was also transformative to remind me that people come from different perspectives. And even though we might look similar, there are some unique historical factors that make things a little bit different for people who came to America through the route of being a descendant of slaves versus people who chose to come here because of work opportunities or other things. So I think those are my two big informative changing of some of my opinions.
Thank you so much, Tewa. Lorraine, what's brought about the change in opinion? Hopefully you have a change of opinion.
Oh yes, and I can tell you unequivocally that marrying into an African family has been the biggest impetus. I am married happily to a guy from Nigeria, and I don't want you to think that it was a mission to bridge the gap. Love just happened. But it's interesting because I remember when I first started dating, there were concerns. Are you sure he doesn't have a wife back in Nigeria? And he told me his mom told him he was supposed to come here to go to school and go back home. He should not mix with American women. But it happened. But in us coming together, developing relationships, asking questions, learning the traditions, of my husband's family. My perspective has broadened so much, and I've recognized that the same struggles, I shouldn't say the same because there are unique struggles to each culture, right? But just coming close to people has made such a difference in me seeing that we're more alike and we can do more together to sharpen one another as we come together. Probably also though, and my husband will probably get me for confessing this, moving to Atlanta has been such a tremendous help because it's a melting pot of so many different cultures, especially the African community. There's so many Nigerians here in Atlanta. And before we moved here, my husband had nothing to do with Africans. Like, I don't know what it was. Maybe you guys can help me understand that. But coming here, that was our salvation. We didn't have a family until we mixed, and it revived in him even his Nigerian heritage and helped us in passing those things down to our sons. So it's been such a blessing, I believe. And as Tewa said, just learning, reading, because I was so ignorant. Before I married into this family, before I moved to Atlanta. I've learned so much just from mixing with different cultures and seeing how we're stronger together.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much. So I'm going to respond to that question too. So I always tell people that if I went back to Nigeria 2 years after I came to the United States, I would go with a totally wrong impression. So we lived in this apartment where, it was what you would call a rundown apartment. So all the people we saw were people who, didn't go out to work, who were there by the elevator, maybe smoking and doing things like that. That was my image of Black people. So I took this class in college when I was in nursing school. And I had to write an essay on the welfare system. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited to write this. And I wrote this long essay about nobody should be on welfare. Everybody can just get up and work. And why would some people, and all of this. My professor was an African-American female. And she called me. She was like, no, you're not going to do this. Why are you so one-sided? Why? She said, go back to the library and find out about the other side. I was kind of angry, like, I should be able to write whatever I want to write, but I'm glad she sent me back because I didn't even look at any other. I had my opinion going into the essay and I didn't look at any other thing. Mm-hmm. But after she told me that, I went to do research and, and I found out some, another side of the story, why people could be on welfare. And then I also took American history and I really, really learned a lot there. I learned that even not having males in the African-American households, a lot of times, there were times that the men were taken from the home in Alabama and sent to California. So it was like the design was there that the men would not even be there. I started learning a lot of things. And then, of course, living in the United States for these past few decades, I've seen the strength. I mean, you don't need to look further. The civil rights movement, the strength of people, what people were willing to do to lose their lives, Rosa Parks saying, I'm not giving up my seat today. And, everything that African Americans have done to show strength, to show being resolute, just everything positive. I think about it that in Africa right now, in every country, almost every country in Africa, we have problem with rulership, with bad rulers, corrupt rulers. They are the same skin as we are. What have we been able to do with them? We just keep talking about it every day, but we have not been able to do anything. But African Americans in this country stood up along with their allies. I also learned that, there were a lot of people in the process, not just Black people, but other people also who were their allies. They confronted this issue. And so who are we? And I also think about the fact that when you think about it, our parents that went to college in the 40s and 50s, they all went to England. They didn't come to America because they weren't going to come where they were going to be slaves or where they were not going to be able to do this and that. It was only after African Americans paved the way, suffered, died, went through all of this. That's when Africans began to come here. Let's tell the truth. That's when we started to come here. So I started to have a better understanding. And then I had the privilege of attending a Black American church, many. And there, like, in my church in Atlanta, in Decatur, nobody talked about going anywhere else but college. Every child is destined to go to college. That's just the norm. I remember one time I invited my trial partner, a white male, to church. And after church, he was like, Tinuke, wow. The people in your church, as I came in, they were looking at the colors of my suit and they helped me adjust it. He said, they're also dressed here impeccably. I mean, I don't know what kind of Black people, well, in courts, the kind of people we see, criminals, that's the image that my friend, my white male friend had. When he got to my church, he was like, wow, these people are trying to dress me up, make me look nice. He was so impressed. And like I said, everybody's thinking about college. So many times we're ignorant because, that's all we have heard. But I'm glad that I've learned some wonderful things. So what are some positive and negative, and these questions, if it's something that we have answered, we can just move on if you don't have much to say and we'll go to what people have to say. But what are some positive and negative experiences you have had with Africans and Caribbeans? Lorraine and Lawrence will answer that.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Probably the biggest one I would say is just the degree of commitment and sacrifice. Like oftentimes, we just look at like the end product, and I don't know if I can use you, sis, as an example. Well, just different people that I've heard, like people that were so professional and were actually doing well, wherever they came from, but because they were looked into the future of the opportunities that they could have for their children and their grandchildren, the commitments that they've made, the sacrifices that they've made to come here. I know of people where husband and wives are living on separate continents, and have for years, because of the commitment of the family loyalty, just the degree of spirituality. And honestly, it's not surprising because, that's what's preserved us, I believe, as people of color, the fact that we are people of faith and spirituality. And also just the sense of community and loyalty to family, because especially I know in the Nigerian community, like there is just such a support system, whether it's in joyful celebrations or in grief, that it just wasn't to the same level, I guess. But then when I look at all these positives, I'm like, God, like this is us, it's maybe a different flavor, but we're so much alike. And so the whole thing of us being divided and the misunderstandings, as somebody said, it was intentional to keep us separated, to keep us suspicious about one another, and so if we can somehow, stay aware, stay woke, and override those things, then we'll be so much stronger together. And I'm sorry, you said negatives. Now, the biggest negative for me is the tribalism, whether it's, Africa or, because before we moved to, my husband's Yoruba. It wasn't until we moved to Georgia that my kids even knew anything about, the different tribes. Like that, it never came up. And so, we went to a church where there were like 40 different countries represented, all the Black church, but so all these different cultures. So I'd never really known Trinidad or, the islands or Haiti or any of that. But like, there's always this underlying competition between cultures. Why? That I still don't really get. I still don't really get, because we're all Black, and if you get stopped on the street, or stopped in the store, they don't know where you came from. You're Black, so we need to come together and work it out. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's my turn. I really haven't had any negative experiences. I guess part of my life is going from sheltered bubble to the next sheltered bubble to the next sheltered bubble. I go from prep school to college. And when I get to college, almost all my friends are exclusively college students. I go from the college to the military. I go from military to graduate school. I go from graduate school to law school. I go from law school to my profession, where I work 70 or 80 hours a week. And then I go from that to hanging my own shingles. So for me, it's always, in my mind, I see myself almost as an economic being first. I have a wife I'm supposed to take care of. I have children that I'm supposed to take care of. So I see myself as an economic being first. So I really haven't had any negative contact with Caribbeans or Africans. We go to court and I have a disagreement with Tanuke. That's a disagreement with an African? No, that's a disagreement with Tanuke. That's not any sort of, I've had disagreements, but the disagreement has never risen in my mind to the level of I'm having a disagreement with a Bahamian. When I first went to Jamaica and sort of had conversations with Jamaicans in Jamaica about the big island, little island thing, which I didn't understand. So if you're from a big island, you can't have a supervisor who's from a little island. I don't even know the size of the islands, but if Jamaica's smaller than the Bahamas, the Jamaican boss can't tell the Bahamian what to do. Like, I don't know anything about that. I'm totally clueless about that. You have to understand, I'm in high school between 80 and 84. I was introduced to Black authors, African-American authors, by a show on TV called A Man Called Hawk, which was a spinoff of Spencer for Hire. So I didn't learn about the souls of Black folk, and I didn't learn about The Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison, and Black Boy by Richard Wright and Maya Angelou. I never knew anything about those authors until I was 19 or 20 years old. So basically 19 through 26 was me learning and reading all of the Black authors that maybe folks just automatically know now. I didn't go to an HBCU. I went to business school in Manhattan, Pace University in New York City. So I spent the early part of my 20s just getting in touch and reading, The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. I spent so much time learning and studying and reading about African Americans. This whole I'm mad at somebody else. I got to get my own house in order. I don't have time to be mad at anybody else or jealous of anybody else or putting down anybody else, because I got so much that I have to learn. And I'm learning it, yes, through the literature, but I'm also learning from having direct contact with people. So the whole I'm having problems with this person and that person, I haven't had that in my career in 22 years hanging the shingle. I really just don't have this I have personality conflicts, but not sort of national culture conflicts. Those aren't, I don't see them as culture conflicts. I see them more as personality conflicts if I have them. And I don't have very many of those either.
Wow, thank God for it.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yeah, different experiences just open you up to different things.
Yes.
So positive and negatives about African Americans now, Abby again.
Like every people, there are positives and negatives. What breaks down the walls to where you just lump everyone into one bucket is ignorance, yes, prejudice, and yet we are prejudiced in some of us, even as Black people. Take, for instance, what Lorraine said earlier about coming to Atlanta and suddenly realizing that, oh, we're not all Black people. There's the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Jaw, the this, the that, and we break it down to the minutest detail. Your town is up the hill, mine is down the hill. And those are, as I said, ignorance, some, prejudice, some of it, others arrogance. The arrogance that somehow my Black is better than your Black. Mm-hmm. Or the idea that you're not Black enough because somehow it's a monolith. And there isn't a variety and there isn't room for all of us. We do need to get beyond that. I've never suffered from that ailment where I think I'm better than anyone else. Or I remember when I came to grad school at Atlanta University, and these people knew I was Nigerian from my last name, and I knew they were Nigerian too. But they did not speak with me. First, I was in a female in a largely male department and all of that, until they were campaigning for elections. All of a sudden, I got a hi. I said, "Oh, really? Okay. Now you know I exist." And I threw in a word or two in their language so they know you were wrong. You were wrong for that. And it is wrong wherever we find it, where we can get along. I have negative experiences with my people, and I have negative experiences with every other person's people. So like Lauren said, you don't lump them into meaning because I had a negative experience with one person from this group, or even several people from this group, that they are all bad.
Exactly.
Thank you. Mr. Dennis, you got something to say to this?
I suppose in some ways, coming from the Caribbean placed me in a in a unique spot, because I didn't come directly from the continent, and I didn't not right in the United States. So I seem to like come right in the middle somewhere. And I don't know, I want to call it a natural bridge. but one of the things that I thought that was helpful to me in adjusting in general to people, to all people, but particularly to my people, was my father made sure when we were 11, 12, getting ready for what we call the 11 plus exam, we had to go to the local public library, get a library card, and we were required to read items or the literature or any kind of material that helped you to broaden your scope of understanding the world in which we lived. And at the time, my father used to talk about things like, I was into sports at the time. Cricket was a big thing for us in American basketball. But my father definitely didn't see that as the road forward. And he would say things to me like, you have to read. And then he would we had a local newspaper called The Advocate. And I had to read it every, especially on weekends. And it was not a direct report, but we had to do something I had to do something to indicate to him that I read those documents. And he, at the time, and this was in the early 60s, I think towards the end of the 50s and beginning of the 60s, he started talking about names that I could not pronounce. He had names like Nkrumah, and he would talk things like another name that was on his lips was Steve Biko. And I said, who's these people? And he would, and there was another name that came up all the time, Ian Smith, in a place called Rhodesia. And these things, I said, what in the world is this? So he explained this to me and what was actually going on. So my whole thought process started changing. So by the time I came to the United States, I had a pretty good understanding of the continent. I had a pretty good understanding of America, although that was kind of a theoretical understanding. When it became practical, it was easier, not easy, but easier to adapt and adjust because my father had done something to open up my mind to the world. And I did not see just the Caribbean. I was born there and I was not just limited to that. So in some respects, I suppose that kind of helped me to be that natural bridge.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm seeing some interesting things that people are putting on. So it'd be nice to get into that. We have just one more question, but Lorraine, you said something about, when you came to Atlanta and started seeing all this, even within one culture, in Nigeria, you have all the different tribes. In Kenya, any country in Africa, you have all the different tribes. And obviously for Nigeria, I don't think it's competition, but there's definitely something there. And there's a lot also of perception, misperception, misunderstanding. So when we were talking about this program, my husband actually told me, he said, you know what, this conversation has to happen among Nigerians, like the different tribes. So I'm thinking that what we are doing today is going to spark off different conversations. I love confronting elephants in the room. It's like, why is it there and nobody's talking about it? And it's causing problems. Whereas if we just talked about it, then we may be able to get to the bottom of it, and have more unity. So this particular conversation, have it in different parts of where you are, all over the United States. Have this conversation that we're having today among your friends. And then within all the different countries, have the conversation as far as the different tribes. So our last question.
I'm sorry, before you go, because I just want to come to what you said is so very key. We are so guilty as Black people of wanting whites to understand our experience, our history. And among ourselves, we don't understand each other. We don't respect each other.
That's right.
So it's like, how can we expect them to?
Amen.
So thank you for making that point.
Amen. You made a very, very important point. Right. If you don't respect yourself, right, nobody else is going to respect you. Right. And if you take people of African descent as one, if we don't have respect for ourselves, don't expect other people to respect us. Thank you so much. So we've said all this today, obviously with the short time that we have. So what advice or call to action, what do we need to do going on from today? So for the Africans that are on this panel, what advice or call to action would you give to fellow Africans and fellow Caribbeans? So Tewa, you go first.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this, forum. And secondly, I want to say, I think it's conversations like this that really just continuing to happen makes all the difference. I think there were movies like Black Panther, which, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, I think that it helped to spark conversations, right? About both tribalism, about perception on African Americans by Africans, and also the other way around with some of the characters in the movie, but also just this shared sense of pride that we can have across the pond, so to speak, that I think has been really important. So I'd say in terms of continued advice for Africans and Caribbeans, just making sure to continue to educate ourselves, not just on African history, but on African American history and on what transpired after people were taken from West Africa or other places, to just continue to remember what historical things lead to why people are where they are, because it's that understanding that lends towards empathy. And in general, when I see someone now, instead of thinking, oh, they're lazy or they're not hardworking or they're not this or they're not that, my thought process immediately goes to, oh, I wonder what happened in their life that led to them being where they are. And I think if we think about that for anybody, you will have a much better chance of being able to relate well with them, like them, enjoy them, be a kind person to them, and understand them, than if you're just like, oh, I just see a person who doesn't have a job, they must be X. So that's just my advice, just having questions, being deliberate about your education, and just really being empathetic.
Okay. So I have some things that I put down for that question. I want Africans to know that we are not better. We are not more intelligent. We don't have different genes from other people, but we have some environmental differences that have caused this to happen, which is similar to what Tewa just said. For instance, when you're here looking at African Americans, you are looking at the whole group. So you see everyone from, the bottom to the top. Now, when you think about Africans that have migrated here, there are people that decided, you know what, I want to leave my comfort zone. I want to go somewhere else. That takes motivation and determination. So you are looking at this group that has made this decision. That is not all Africa. If you go to Africa, you're going to see everybody, every type of person that's here is there. But the people you are comparing the whole of African Americans with are Africans who made a decision. And when you make a decision, that's what we tell our children. I didn't come here to play. I didn't suffer all of this so that you wouldn't go to school. So we have a motivation. We have something that's pushing us. So we need to know that that's different. And, African leadership, if we, like I said before, that if we did whatever we needed to do there, we wouldn't even have what we have now. So we have to recognize the strength in African Americans, as I said before. Now, what can we do? I know that, African Americans are doing this with African Americans and maybe a few Africans, but I think Africans also need to take it on so that, not to sound condescending or anything. This is my advice to Africans, and, we will also have advice the other way around, is to, if you feel that maybe you are in a neighborhood or about a neighborhood where help is needed, especially from the churches. We say these at our church all the time, and hopefully one day we'll be able to actually do it. So if you have an African church where, all your children are going to college and you have all this going for you, what are you doing to the neighborhood next door? To your church? What are you doing about those children? Are you helping them, helping with homework, doing something to reach out so that they also can have what we have? Are men making themselves mentors in schools? I remember there was a time I was talking to some principals in some schools, and they were saying that they would really love men who can mentor some of the children at school. And another thing is that we need to be active in the cause. We said earlier that during the civil rights movement, there were a lot of allies. During the Black Lives Matter, there were a lot of allies There were white people, Asians, everybody joining together with Black people. But there were some Africans who were stepping behind. We cannot step behind when we need to do something, but then when the gains come, when there are advantages to being African or African American or being Black, maybe there's some scholarship that's just for Blacks, we rush and we get it. So if we're going to do that, if we're going to reap the benefits, then we must join in the cause and not stay behind. So that's what I would say. So for the African Americans on the line, what do you have to say to fellow African Americans as an advice or call to action? Lawrence, and then Lorraine.
Well, I'm gonna say this. I don't do too much preaching, because my father, who raised me, and he had a number of brothers, and they always sort of emphasize, get your own house in order. Get your own house in order. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, even though I've been with the same woman for 35 years, I know that I'm a lot extra. So I've got to pay attention to her in order to keep her. I'm still at 20 and 17, I'm still trying to ultimately raise my children. And raising boys in America is challenging. Raising African-American boys in America is challenging. I suspect raising Nigerian boys and raising Ugandan boys in America is challenging, because raising boys in America is challenging. What I always tell people is start sort of at that cellular level. Get your house in order. In terms of the person, for me, I always start with criminal law. Refrain from drugs and alcohol. Honor your commitments. The commitment that you make to the person that you're with, and the commitment that you make to your children, and the commitment that you make to your workplace. Refrain from drugs and alcohol, honor your commitments. My now 17-year-old told me at a QT one day when we were 12, because I'm always talking to him in the car on the way from baseball home. So he says, out of the blue, so if I don't consume drugs and alcohol and I marry the right woman, I won't ever see the inside of a jail cell. You got it. That's exactly it. That is just that simple. That's the whole thing right there. Refrain from drugs and alcohol and pick the right woman and commit to her, and you'll never see the inside. You'll never have handcuffs on your whole life. Because interestingly, as you'll know, if you stay sober and you say, listen, I'm going to honor my commitments, at some point in time, you're going to have to read something more than what you know. You're going to have to associate with other people who know more than you know. And you will eventually be pulled out of whatever ignorance that there may be. As long as you're sober, you're going to ask questions, and you will be put in touch with other teachers and leaders who will turn you on to books, who will turn you on to groups, and then you will eventually ultimately become stronger. But listen, if you're junk, you don't need to get out into the world and connect with other junk. You got to get yourself. I'm 56, I'm working on me. 2021 was 71 books. I never believed I could read 71 books in a year. I mean, I listened to most of them on Audible, but the point is still the same. I never thought that would happen. I just think you got to keep working on yourself.
Thank you so much. There's nothing like self-empowerment. Lorraine?
Amen. So much has already been said. I think the biggest thing is treating each other equally, because we are, I think it was Abby that mentioned about how sometimes we jump on this bandwagon of my Blackness is greater than yours, my experience is worse than yours, but as collectively, if we can just see, if we're helping each other, we build everybody is better for it. And just small things, when I think of, I hate when I hear stories, and I've even been in a company just last weekend of how we don't make an effort, we don't try to like pronounce names. Some of the African names are really not that difficult, like phonetically, you look at it and we don't even make an attempt. How we make fun of names, you make fun of dress and foods, like just simple stuff. To be kind. I think it was just to be kind and to be respectful. It's really, really not that difficult if we can honor. And so many of the movements that were successful is because people put down those differences and they came together to see how we can make everybody better. better for it. So.
Amen. Thank you, Lauren. Lawrence, you mentioned something about raising a Black boy, regardless of where they come from, is hard anyway. I remember one day my son called me from college. He went to Georgia Southern. And he called me, and I could see that he was distraught. He called me and told me that a police officer had just stopped him. And they told him that he looked like someone that they were looking for. And just hearing it, I mean, I had tears in my eyes. Like my son was just stopped by a police officer. And so it's not written on him that he's Nigerian, and it doesn't matter. Even if he's Nigerian, in this day and age, I think it's worse for him that he's an immigrant. So, but so all our children, if there's anything that any Black male suffers, then it's for every Black male. So let's not be deceived. All of them, go through that. So thank you so much, panelists. We're going to go to the questions. And if any of you wants to chip into any of the questions, we would do that. Blackness to me means greatness and pride. That's my daughter. Black is beautiful. Okay. Do not let anyone tell you that your native language is vernacular. It is derogatory. My vernacular is English and my language is Yoruba. Wow. Yeah, that's the way to look at it. That's the way to feel. What do we think is the most accurate term for people in the African diaspora, particularly in the US? Some people don't like the term Black, but others don't want to be called African American because they don't see themselves as African, even though they are likely descendants of African slaves. Does anyone want to take that?
I can just talk briefly. At Howard, we have this conversation all the time, roundtables about this. There is no answer that will satisfy everyone, unfortunately. For me, when I hear Black, that is what I think about, but I understand that my perspective is one such that Black is not a negative term for me. But for someone who does have a perspective where they hear Black and it's a negative term, I can see how they'd feel differently. Similarly, what someone mentioned about the African, a lot of my friends had said, I don't want to call myself an African or an African American because that implies that I have some sense of belonging or roots in Africa. And we had talked a lot at Howard too about the Back to Africa movement, in which lots of African Americans actually, or Garveyists or people who followed Marcus Garvey moved back to West Africa and did not find respite, did not find home, or did not find people who wanted to accept them. And so from that kind of were like, I don't want to call myself African. So I don't think there's an answer, unfortunately, for this in terms of the term. But I think that hopefully as we continue to have more conversations and understand each other more, people will feel less averse to the idea of having come from Africa because we'll have more pride. And honestly, some of the stuff we talked about earlier about the things that even Africans need to do within Africa in our own Black countries with Black leaders where we're not standing up against leadership to make it a better place. I think that if Africans take a better control and a better hold of our nations, even against our corrupt leadership, then it'll be something more of pride for people all over the world to feel like they can associate with this, as opposed to with some of the dysfunction and corruption that currently exists. But I don't think that there's one catch-all that everyone would feel comfortable with at this particular point in history.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Tewa. That was brilliant. Not just perception, but ignorance sometimes, yes. I think our opinions change when we have relationships and experience with each other. Absolutely, absolutely. All right. Okay, what does it mean? That's another dot of mine. What does it mean when people make comments like you are not Black enough? That makes me think that being Black is more than just being a part of the African diaspora.
I always interpret that to mean stereotypical. You're not speaking in Ebonic, or you don't value what I have seen on television. You don't strike me as a stereotypical Black, and that's what I was telling you earlier in terms of my perception of Black and what other people are, what I have to try to understand other people are saying when they say Black. So if somebody says to me, you're not Black enough, I know that they have a negative connotation of Black. That's exactly what I know when they hit me with that. But I know what they mean. they mean they mean that they are uncomfortable with me as a Black man speaking the standard English. They're uncomfortable with my command of certain words. They're uncomfortable. And listen. Here's the reality. Here's a certain reality. If you're going to say that racism has kept you back as person A, you're going to have to explain why the person B that looks just like you has not been kept back. Person B that's succeeding's got to make person A feel a certain type of way if person A is saying, I'm a victim. That's just the way it is. So I don't expect all Black people to love me. I don't expect all African Americans to love me, because at a certain point, they're going to say, wait a minute, how are you able to do X? Well, I'm going to work 80 hours a week. That's how I'm able to do X. And I understand that there's racism. I'm not going to tell you that there's not racism, but I've already defined Blackness for you. Blackness is me being an underdog. And as an underdog, am I going to further handicap myself? No. So I'm not going to drink alcohol and use drugs. I'm not going to further handicap myself as an underdog, and I'm going to attack everything as an underdog so that I ultimately can succeed. But again, what are we talking about? If you view Black as victim, you view racism as victimizing you, which is why you haven't been able to achieve certain things. And it may be true. I can't tell you it's not true. You have to feel a certain kind of way about the African succeeding, or the Jamaican succeeding, or the other African American succeeding in the environment that you say that you cannot succeed in. You have to feel some kind of way about that. So I don't expect everybody's gonna love everybody just because you have to get past. At some point in time, listen, when my wife leaves me, it's my fault. I don't have to look at anybody else. I'm extra. So I already know if the judge gets mad at me, I know that I'm extra. You have to look at yourself first. Always, listen, no matter what's going on, always look at yourself first and ask, how can I improve me? How can I improve this situation? And when I'm finished with me, and I'm 56 and I haven't finished with me, then I'll turn and start telling Tanuke how to live her life better. Soon as I finish with me, I'll turn to somebody else and tell them how to live.
Amen. Amen.
If
Lawrence,
I can-
yeah, go
I can
ahead.
say something to
Yes, yes.
I think one of the important things is the fact that at least we see the need to talk. We see the need for conversation. And I think several things have been said here this evening that is a continuing affirmation of where we're going. You say that people need to talk within families. You said across the countries, people need to have that conversation. And I agree. And even what we're doing now, we're talking a cross-cultural group of people with different backgrounds and different understanding and different perceptions, et cetera, different experiences. But we're having a conversation, and it's an open conversation, and we're learning from each other. We're having we're stripping pieces from our perception, whatever they may be, good or bad, and we're adding pieces to it, which makes us better people. If we look at the conversation that's going on, even if you don't agree with the conversations, if you look across the continent and you listen to someone like a Julius Malema, you simply say, well, is he the kind of person you want to deal with? Are you dealing with, you're dealing in even here in the States, and you listen to Farrakhan, for example. And these are people who we may not always agree with because they're from others. They may be controversial figures. But do we shut these people down because we don't agree? At least we listen because they say something that impact their lives, but also impact our lives. And not everything they say because they may be controversial figures, we ignore. We learn from each other. And one of the things that I've come to terms with is I don't ignore different views. And I don't want to ignore views that coming from a Western perspective either. Because while we have, as immigrants, whatever you want to, however, whatever label you want to put on us, while we've had our unique experiences, we've also seen where other people, Jews and others who've joined the movement to help us move in a different, in a particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the whole idea is while we're talking about ourselves, we also listen to others.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if there's one thing that'll come out of this discussion this evening is that we're not fixed on a particular set of perspectives, that we're looking at a system of values and how we want to incorporate those to make us better people. And I think that.
You muted yourself.
Muted.
You are muted, you're muted.
Oh, I'm simply saying, and that hopefully would be one of the outcomes from our discussion here.
Amen. And that's awesome because the next comment says the danger of a single story. Check out the TED Talk by Ngozi Chiamanda.
Mm-hmm.
So all of us are just going by single stories on different cultures and stuff like that. But yeah, we're more than just a single story. My husband noted that, I had said something that Africans did not come here during slavery or during segregation. They waited till everything was better. And we just learned this past week that Nnamdi Azikiwe, one of our leaders in Nigeria, graduated from Lincoln in 1930. That happened, but I'm sure you could pick with your fingers how many Africans were here. But yeah, he did graduate from an American university in 1930. Okay. Okay. My husband think marriage. He's always thinking family life. What happens when we don't have conversations on issues that bother us? Yeah, things get swept under the rug, and then problems happen. Mind shift. We also have to get out of our comfort zone, reach out to others, not like you, not from your tribe, and not from your country. All right. So thank you so much. What Lawrence said about developing yourself, looking inward, that applies to anything that we do in life, not just about racism. But whenever we think, I'm in a coaching program and they're very big on talking about that you can't say that is because of someone, regardless of who you are, African American, Caucasian, whatever you are, you always have to just know that as far as it lies with me, I'm going to do my best. If I find, restriction or whatever it is along the way, I'm still going to keep forging. I'm not going to let anyone be the reason that I'm not going to succeed. Mm-hmm. I thank you so much, panelists. I really, really appreciate the time that you've spent, the wisdom that you have shared. I'm praying that this will be the beginning of conversations, whether in families, in communities. Let's have this conversation. Let's come together. Let's understand ourselves so that we can move forward in unity, and that will lead to progress, and that will lead to coming together and doing wonderful things. So thanks everyone for watching.
Thank you,
Anyone has any last words among the panelists?
I just want to thank you for putting the conversation together, Tanuke. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
Good to see all the faces.
Thank you. Bye.